Welcome to Climate Curious Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodness from our TEDx experts in under 5 minutes.
In this week's Climate Curious, we're asking, what are sources and sinks? And yes, I did just get my bathroom redone, but no, we're not talking about bathroom fixtures. Sources and sinks are actually our most powerful tool in turning up or dialing down climate change, says this week's guest, Jon Foley, an environmental scientist and executive director at Project Drawdown. They can help us prioritize the most impactful climate actions that will either cut pollution at its source, like decarbonising buildings, or support solutions that can absorb it, like trees and oceans. Let's head over to Jon now to hear about the 6 main solutions that can help us get real about making the biggest difference to reversing climate change in the fastest and most efficient way possible. Stay curious.
We got to cut the emissions, stop putting crap in the atmosphere that's causing more climate change. Every day that goes by that we burn more stuff and throw it into the atmosphere, whether it's carbon dioxide or methane, other funny gases like nitrous oxide, fluorinated gases, there's a couple hundred greenhouse gases we actually track out there, but those are the big ones. The more we dump that stuff in the atmosphere, it builds up over time, warming the planet. We all know that part from our Al Gore movies and our primary schools and all this kind of stuff. So we have to cut the emissions of those things. That's jobs number 1, 2, and 3. No question. There's no other way around it. And there are basically 6 areas we have to focus on. It turns out that all those emissions boil down to 6 major economic sectors. First is making electricity. So burning coal or natural gas, that's the big problem there. Second would be industry, making stuff like steel, concrete, glass, but also throwing away stuff and dealing with waste. Landfills, wastewater treatment, those are surprisingly large emitters as well. So it's electricity, industry, buildings, transportation, food, which a lot of people forget about, but it's one of the biggest sectors. About a quarter to a third of all the emissions are related to food, it turns out. That's burning down forest in the Amazon for more agricultural land. It's all those belching cows releasing methane into the world. It's also stuff coming out of the soils from overusing fertilizers. And that's a huge sector, and we're not making real progress on that one yet. And then the last is processing energy itself, like turning crude oil we dig out of the ground and turning it into petrol or diesel fuel or aviation fuel or things that are more refined. There's a lot of energy and emissions tied up in that. So if we fix electricity and industry and buildings, transport, food, and energy processing, there's a lot of different things in here, but we actually have on the order of about 100 different solutions across those 6 big areas that can really solve the problem. And that's remarkably good news. It turns out at Project Drawdown, we analyze all the different things you could do to reduce emissions across all those different areas. And you know what? We could do it. Turns out the numbers add up. We've got enough solutions today that are practical, real, scalable, and yes, affordable. In fact, we're going to make money in the process for the most part. We could actually cut those emissions close to zero today without any new inventions at all. Some of them would be a little bit inconvenient and expensive, but it's totally doable. So we don't have to wait for new technologies. New technologies would be great. They might make it cheaper, faster, better. That's awesome. Well, please come with your new technologies, but don't wait for them. Get started now. So that's why I always talk about now is better than new and time's more important than tech. The other big realm of climate solutions that gets a lot of attention is removing the pollution later. Like we first want to cut the pollution from ever going in the atmosphere, but then we talk about what's called carbon removal, ways of removing carbon and other greenhouse gases, stuff like that, into from the atmosphere and put it into something we can lock up away from the atmosphere where it's doing harm. Mm-hmm. And there are 2 big buckets of doing that. There's kind of industrial approaches, kind of big machines that can do it, or nature that can pull carbon out of the atmosphere, because that's how photosynthesis works. That's how life works on this planet, is starting with air and turning it into life. Plants basically doing that. So how do we do that? The plant-based side is relatively straightforward, but we can grow more trees. We can not cut down the trees we already have. We can build up soils, build up more grasses and plants. The greener the stuff is on the planet and the richer the soils are on the planet means we've pulled carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back where it used to be. That's great, but it may not be permanent because people are messy. We might come along and cut down those trees again, or they might burn down in a different climate where it's hotter and drier all the time. So there's a real question of permanence. And whether or not, if I paid somebody to plant a bunch of trees in the Amazon, did they really do it? Or did they just take my money and run? So it's not verifiable sometimes, and it may not be permanent. And so there are a lot of question marks about those biological approaches to carbon removal. That leads to the machines, which sound great. We're throwing a lot of money at the UK, the US. A lot of countries are spending tax dollars on this. And some investors like Bill Gates and a whole bunch of others are throwing money at these technologies. But bottom line, they don't work very well. They're itsy bitsy. If we added all of them together in the world, we've removed about 3 seconds of the world's climate pollution so far. And we spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to do it. It's not very effective. And second, if we use the same amount of money, certainly, or energy, because these machines use a lot of energy somewhere else, like building solar panels or, building better batteries or energy conservation, we would have had a much bigger impact on climate. We might have not just removed 3 seconds of emissions, but maybe prevented 5 minutes of the world's emissions, something much bigger. So it's kind of a waste of money. It's very small technologies. And also it's kind of been used by the oil and gas companies as a bit of a fig leaf to say, don't worry about my pollution. I'll remove it later. Like, really? If you're in a pub and a bunch of people are smoking and you're coughing, like, oh, don't worry, I'll just suck it out later. I'm going to just breathe it in and hold it. Is that the approach? I mean, no, just don't smoke. Stop. Don't do that. Or have a fan that kind of removes it. That doesn't work very well. We all know that. So this is a Band-Aid solution at best. But what I think is happening is it's mainly used as an excuse to kind of keep building fossil fuel projects. Like, don't worry, we'll clean it up later. And we've been falling for that for decades in one form or another, whether it was clean coal in the 1980s or carbon capture. Now it's called direct air capture. Different technologies come and go. None of them have worked especially well, but the same idea of it's a fig leaf for fossil fuels. So I'm not a big fan of that. And the math just doesn't add up.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our superstar podcast team at TEDxLondon. Until next time,
Stay curious.